January 10, Ukrainian forces dismantle a newly deployed Russian strategic missile system in Belarus after intelligence confirms a critical vulnerability window.
January 10, 10:45 p.m. Eastern Belarus. From the outside, nothing looked unusual. No airspace warnings, no emergency alerts. Civilian flight routes remained unchanged, and regional traffic data showed a quiet night settling in under freezing temperatures. To anyone watching from above, the area appeared calm and inactive. But beneath the snow-covered surface, inside a restricted military compound not marked on public maps, activity had already crossed a critical threshold. For the past 10 days, the site had been quietly transforming itself into something far more dangerous. Commercial satellite sensors were the first to notice the shift. While surface temperatures dropped to -8 degrees Celsius, underground heat signatures inside the compound spiked sharply. Residual ground heat increased by more than 400%, indicating sustained operation of heavy electrical systems well below the surface. Logistics data told the same story. Between late evening and early morning hours, heavy transport traffic surged by more than 300%. Vehicles weighing over 50 tons entered the base at precise 47-minute intervals, following a pattern too regular to be accidental. Rail spurs that had sat dormant since the early 1990s were suddenly active again. Sealed containers moved through reinforced access points that had not been used in more than 30 years, suggesting long-term planning rather than a temporary deployment. Nothing was being staged for movement. Everything was being staged for completion. Signals intelligence confirmed the escalation. Encrypted military communications around the site increased ninefold, with multiple uplinks remaining active for up to 72 continuous hours. No exercises were announced. No official deployments were declared, yet every indicator pointed in the same direction. This was not a drill. By 11:21 p.m., intelligence analysts reached a consensus. The facility was hosting the first fully assembled Oreshnik strategic missile battery ever positioned outside Russian territory. This was not a rotation or a temporary show of force. It was a permanent forward deployment. Each launcher carried a solid fuel missile capable of operating under internal temperatures exceeding 4,600 degrees Celsius during boost phase. Estimated terminal velocity ranged between Mach 9 and Mach 10, placing interception probability below 15% under standard NATO modeling. The system was expensive for a reason. One complete launcher package, including command vehicles, power units, and support equipment, was valued at roughly $400 million. Maintaining operational readiness required more than 90 specialized personnel and electrical demand, comparable to a mid-size industrial facility. By relocating the battery into Belarus, Russia shortened flight time to several European capitals to under 8 minutes. This was not a tactical improvement, it was a strategic signal, and that signal carried a dangerous assumption. The battery was not meant to be fired, it was meant to exist. Because the moment Oreshnik failed, whether intercepted, sabotaged, or destroyed, the credibility of the entire system would collapse with it. At that moment, Ukraine was not preparing to attack. It was watching, waiting, letting the system finish assembling itself. The question was no longer if the site would become vulnerable. It was when. If you were in that command room, would you strike early or wait until everything was in one place? The first decision Ukrainian planners made was not about weapons. It was about restraint. At this stage, the Oreshnik battery was visible, vulnerable, and technically within strike range, but it was not yet valuable enough to destroy. By early morning, continuous drone surveillance and satellite updates every 90 minutes were already providing launcher coordinates with sub-meter accuracy. Several long-range attack options were available on paper. None were approved. At that point, only 6 launchers had arrived at the site. Fueling operations were incomplete, and multiple missiles remained in transport configuration rather than combat-ready posture. A successful strike would have destroyed visible equipment while preserving most of the system's production value. Operational analysis was blunt. An early attack would eliminate no more than 20 to 25% of the battery's strategic worth. The remaining components could be redeployed or rebuilt within weeks. That outcome was assessed as insufficient. Instead, analysts focused on a different metric: time. A fully assembled Oreshnik battery required 14 to 16 months of synchronized manufacturing, rare materials, and components already constrained by international sanctions. Destroying the entire system at once would erase an entire production cycle, not just damage a single unit. Waiting carried real risk. Once fueled, each missile contained volatile solid propellant capable of generating internal temperatures above 4,000 degrees Celsius. Any strike after full fueling risked uncontrolled detonation rather than a predictable collapse. Despite that danger, the directive was issued. No launch authorization, no preemptive strike, continuous tracking only. From that moment forward, the confrontation stopped being about firepower and became a problem of timing. Ukrainian command was no longer preparing to attack the base. It was waiting for the base to finish assembling itself. That wait did not last long. As the night progressed, the pattern inside the compound changed. Within a narrow window, all remaining Oreshnik components were moved into the same operational zone. Launchers, command vehicles, fuel units, and support equipment were concentrated inside a radius of less than 600 meters. Movement logs showed no outbound traffic. Everything was arriving, nothing was leaving. Thermal data escalated sharply. Ground temperature inside the compound rose by nearly 500%, driven by continuous fueling operations and full activation of power systems. Independent analysts estimated that the site now contained solid propellant with an explosive yield equivalent to more than 1,100 tons of TNT. At this stage, the facility crossed a critical threshold. Once solid fuel loading reached final pressure, the missiles could no longer be safely relocated. Any attempt to disperse the launchers would require depressurization cycles lasting several hours, a delay incompatible with combat conditions. The base had effectively locked itself in place. Satellite imagery confirmed the shift. Blast doors were sealed. Internal ventilation systems ran at maximum capacity. Emergency response vehicles were repositioned closer to the bunkers. These were not defensive measures. They were indicators of final assembly. For Ukrainian planners, the significance was immediate. The target was no longer a collection of vehicles. It was a single interconnected system. If one structure failed, secondary ignition would follow. If ignition occurred, containment would be impossible. From this point forward, the situation could no longer be reversed. Everything that had once been separate was now connected. And once connected, it only required one trigger. By the time the final authorization came through, the plan was already locked. There would be no mass launch, no large strike package, and no second chances. The entire operation relied on synchronization rather than firepower. The strike group was deliberately small. 2 F-16 Block 70/72 aircraft and 10 long-range unmanned aerial vehicles made up the full force. No reserves were assigned, and no assets were considered expendable. The cost imbalance was extreme. The total value of all Ukrainian assets committed to the operation was estimated at under $8 million. The target they were preparing to engage exceeded $4 billion in combined strategic and manufacturing value. The aircraft would never cross the border. All weapons were programmed for standoff release well outside hostile airspace, with flight paths calculated to remain below detection thresholds and avoid early radar correlation. The unmanned systems were equally unassuming. Each drone carried a small gasoline engine, basic guidance hardware, and a warhead weighing less than 80 pounds. Individually, they posed little threat. Collectively, they were designed to shape the battlefield rather than destroy it. Every element had a precise role. Every action was timed to the second. From this point forward, the operation could no longer be adjusted by planners. It would be decided entirely by execution. At 2:00 a.m., the first phase began. From deep inside Ukrainian airspace, the lead F-16 released 2 ADM-160 MAL-J decoys. Within seconds, both units activated electronic profiles designed to mimic high-altitude strike aircraft. Russian early warning radar reacted immediately. Within 90 seconds, the S-400 surveillance system classified more than 25 separate aerial contacts, all appearing to approach at altitudes above 25,000 feet, with signatures consistent with manned aircraft. The response followed doctrine. Target prioritization algorithms shifted tracking capacity toward the perceived high-threat sector. Fire control radars locked on, and launch authorization was granted automatically once correlation thresholds were met. Between 2:52 and 2:56 a.m., 8 S-400 interceptor missiles were fired in rapid sequence. Each interceptor carried an estimated cost exceeding $2.5 million. None engaged a real aircraft. The deception achieved its primary effect. By expending interceptors, the battery entered a mandatory reload cycle requiring 35 to 40 minutes. During that window, long-range air defense coverage was effectively unavailable. More critically, radar operators interpreted the engagement as a success. System logs recorded confirmed kills against false targets, and attention shifted upward, away from low-altitude sectors. While operators focused on the sky above, the actual threat profile remained below 150 feet, masked by terrain and ground clutter. In that moment, one of the most expensive air defense networks in the region was operational in form and blind in effect. With the upper layer occupied, the next phase moved forward unseen. At 3:05 a.m., 6 unmanned aircraft entered the final approach corridor, flying between 120 and 160 feet above ground level. At that altitude, detection depended almost entirely on short-range fire control systems. Pantsir S-1 and Tor M2 units reacted immediately. Multiple tracking channels activated as each system attempted to engage several targets at once, pushing processing capacity to its limit. Beyond 4 to 6 concurrent tracks, sensor refresh rates began to degrade. Reaction time increased by more than 40%, and target handoff between radar and optical systems became inconsistent. Engagement windows narrowed to just 2 or 3 seconds per drone. Fire volume surged. Pantsir cannons discharged at rates exceeding 4,000 rounds per minute, expending tens of thousands of 30mm rounds in under 2 minutes. Missile reload crews were ordered forward while active engagements were still underway, a violation of standard safety procedures. Every sensor, every launcher, and every operator was now committed to the wrong layer of the fight. Thermal imaging showed short-range systems operating continuously, with processor loads peaking above 95%. At that level, no redundancy remained. The network could no longer adapt. It could only continue doing the same thing. And when a system reaches its physical limit, it cannot see what it was never free to look for in the first place. That was the opening Ukraine had been waiting for. If you're still with me, drop a quick comment and tell me which country you're watching from. The decisive moment is next. While the inner defenses were fully engaged at low altitude, the second F-16 remained well outside hostile airspace. The aircraft flew a stable release profile more than 95 kilometers from the target, holding altitude and speed to minimize any chance of radar correlation. No warning tones sounded in the cockpit. No tracking alerts appeared on Russian consoles. At that moment, the air defense network was saturated, focused entirely on the wrong problem. At Trey, Fjorton, AM, 4 AGM-158 JASSM-ER missiles separated from the aircraft in sequence. Each missile descended immediately after release, stabilizing at altitudes between 40 and 60 feet while following preloaded digital terrain maps. At that height, radar detection probability dropped below 10%, even for active fire control systems. The missiles required no external guidance. Internal inertial navigation updated position every fraction of a second, while imaging infrared seekers compared live thermal data against stored facility signatures. Electronic countermeasures no longer mattered. Even full-spectrum jamming would not have altered the guidance solution. Instead of striking reinforced blast doors, the missiles were programmed to exploit structural weak points. Analysts had identified ventilation shafts and pressure control corridors where concrete thickness dropped from more than 6 meters to less than 2.5. Impact velocity exceeded 900 kilometers per hour. Penetration occurred before detonation. Delay fuses triggered inside enclosed spaces, maximizing internal overpressure rather than surface damage. What followed was no longer controlled by weapons or pilots. It was controlled by physics. At 3:00 AM, internal containment thresholds were exceeded. Inside the reinforced bunkers, solid fuel propellant ignited under confined conditions, requiring no external oxygen. Combustion accelerated instantly, generating temperatures estimated above 5,000 degrees Celsius. Internal pressure rose beyond design tolerance in under 1 second. Structural sensors failed across multiple load-bearing points simultaneously. Steel blast doors weighing several tons were forced outward, traveling hundreds of meters before impact. The primary bunker roof collapsed inward, followed by secondary ignition across adjacent storage sections. The thermal plume rose nearly 900 meters into the air, visible to infrared satellites operated by multiple civilian providers. Seismic monitoring stations registered ground vibration equivalent to a magnitude 2.4 event, confirming a chain reaction rather than a single detonation. 2 mobile launchers attempted evacuation procedures. They did not clear the perimeter. Follow-on unmanned strikes impacted exposed missile canisters, triggering additional secondary explosions. Vehicle remains were scattered across a radius exceeding 300 meters, rendering recovery impossible. By the time dawn approached, the site had ceased to function as a military installation. The most heavily defended system in the region had not been defeated in the air. It had been erased on the ground in the one moment when it could not move, disperse, or hide. If this breakdown has been useful so far, take a second to like the video and subscribe. More detailed analyses like this are coming. By sunrise on January 10, the smoke had begun to thin, but the damage was already irreversible. Satellite imagery confirmed the complete loss of 10 Oreshnik launchers, along with all associated command vehicles, fueling systems, and calibration units. What had taken more than 14 months of synchronized manufacturing was erased in minutes. Components restricted by international sanctions, rare materials, and specialized subsystems could not be replaced quickly, if at all. Financial estimates placed total losses between $4.2 and $5 billion. The strategic cost was higher. Oreshnik had been designed as a deterrent platform. Its value depended on secrecy, concentration, and credibility. All 3 collapsed simultaneously. The system was not degraded or delayed. It was deleted as an operational capability. There was no intercepted missile to analyze, no partial success to reframe. The battery never fired a single shot. By mid-morning, the site no longer appeared on Russian operational maps as an active installation. Emergency response units remained in the area, but recovery efforts were limited to containment rather than restoration. What remained was debris, scorched earth, and a capability gap that could not be quickly filled. International reaction followed predictable lines. Public statements were brief. Official channels avoided specifics. Behind closed doors, however, the implications were clear. This was not a story about faster missiles or stronger defenses. It was a lesson in patience, intelligence, and timing. Ukraine did not win by striking first. It won by waiting for the moment when everything was assembled, interconnected, and unable to move. In modern warfare, the most dangerous phase is no longer launch, it is assembly. A system worth billions was not defeated in the sky, but on the ground before it ever became useful. The balance it was meant to enforce vanished with it, replaced by a quieter and more unsettling reality. Technology did not decide this outcome, discipline did. If you've watched this far, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Was the decisive factor here deception, timing, or precision? Share your take in the comments.